Hello everyone and welcome to this new video where we go together. The incredible legend of Nostradamus Michel de Nostredame, known as Nostradamus, was born in 1503 in Saint-Rémy de Provence. He spent many years studying medicine and became one of the most renowned physicians in France in 1555. Michel de Nostredame is already a very recognized person and his reputation is well established. But for the moment, it is not at all his prophecies that have made him known. These are his exploits in medicine at the time. Then still a doctor, Catherine de' Medici will then appeal to him for his qualities as a doctor. And it is during one of his interviews with Catherine de' Medici that Nostradamus will demonstrate his talent to her. Nostradamus then explains to Catherine de' Medici that the king should no longer participate in tournaments because it could lead to his death. And as history has taught us, the king did not listen to the prophecy of Nostradamus and died during a tournament in the beginning, for the most part necessarily. This is going to be a simple coincidence. While for others, they will already detect this as a talent of prophecy. It was from this moment that Nostradamus decided to write once containing many quatrains. For some, these quatrains could predict the future, especially because this work would be called the Prophecies. Whether for the French Revolution or the fate of Napoleon Bonaparte, he would have noted many quatrains that would predict the future for Napoleon Bonaparte. He would have notably written a quatrain where he would speak of a small soldier from Corsica who would become the Emperor of Italy. He would have written other prophecies about the two world wars with the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. For others, he would also have succeeded in predicting the fall of the German regime or even 9/11. But the big problem we have with the specialists who study Nostradamus is that, unfortunately, they interpret these writings and find their meaning after the events have already occurred, which makes their results much more subjective. Because at the moment, no one would have been able to decode any of these messages before it happened. So, if Nostradamus was a prophet and he knew the future so well, why these messages? Why aren't these clearer? When Nostradamus wrote his prophecies, we were in the midst of the Inquisition, so he cannot tell what he wants at all, because if he tells that the monarchy is going to collapse, he would automatically be put to death. So that's why he will mainly revise his quatrains so that only the most enlightened people can decode and understand them. In this way, for most people who wrote Nostradamus would remain gibberish, while for others it would be real predictions realized by a prophet. The second thing to take into account is that he wrote these four in 16th century French, and you should know that today the language has changed a lot, which makes understanding these quatrains necessarily much more difficult. And that is why for many specialists, they will call him clairvoyant, while for others, they would be called obscure, even representative. Nostradamus remains an eternal debate. Among the interpretations made by Nostradamus specialists, it turns out that some quatrains could potentially be false. That way, he would have managed to blur the tracks even more. And for some, of course, it would simply be a new hypothesis for the end of his work. Nostradamus predicted world peace in 2025. We may have a solution by then. But in the meantime, Michel de Nostredame, alias Nostradamus, will continue to disturb, and many people will continue to ask themselves countless questions that will remain unanswered. It is in 1912 that the fabulous Titanic, considered unsinkable, will unfortunately take an iceberg and sink. The whole world will be shocked and will remain in awe. However, there are many rumors that claim that all this was planned, and has been for a long time. Today, a legend has even been formed, named the Titanic Prophecy. It was the American writer Morgan Robertson who wrote in his book The Titanic Prophecy in 1888. Many people who have looked into this legend have found strange similarities between this book and what actually happened. First of all, named the ship the Titan in his book, and which is pretty close to the Titanic. But this is far from the only disturbing coincidence. In Robertson's novel, written in 1880, the Titan weighed 70,000 tons by 243 meters, and at its inauguration, the Titanic weighed about 70,000 tons by 268 meters. The Titan was a ship that had 3 propellers, and again the Titanic also had 3 propellers. The estimated top speed of the Titan was about 25 knots, and that of the Titanic is also 25 knots. But the coincidences don't stop there. Because the number of rescue channels is also similar. On the Titan there were 24 rescue channels, and on the Titanic there were also 24 rescue channels. The Gypsy could accommodate a maximum of 3,000 people, and the Titanic about 3,300. And the two boats were also considered unsinkable because all these plot correlations are incredibly accurate. But let's not forget that they are from a fantasy novel. It must be understood that when this novel was written, manufacturing techniques were not as advanced. And no one could imagine at the time that one day we could build a ship that looked like the Titans. Technically, it was impossible to envisage building such a boat in the near future. We had neither the knowledge nor the money to build such ships. The Titan was therefore purely and simply Mr. Robertson's imagination, and would in fact be the description of the ideal ship that could be imagined at the time. But, as we have seen, new technologies have advanced much faster than expected. We quickly approached this famous ideal ship. He had imagined it at the time. It is even thought that researchers would have relied on this novel to build the Titanic, as it also has other memories of the mysterious two, and 2 ships were under the British flag. They owned the same ballroom, and there were exactly the same number of musicians on board on both boats. The telephone facilities on the Titan were the same as on the Titanic, and there are plenty of other little details like this that are written into the novel and will actually happen a few years later on the Titanic, yet the comparison becomes real because one looks at it, how these becomes real. In the novel, the Titan is said to have been shipwrecked one night in April, around 00 after hitting an iceberg to starboard. The Titanic, meanwhile, will also sink one night in April at 11:40 p.m., precisely a few minutes before midnight. It will also hit an iceberg to starboard. In both cases, it is mentioned that the iceberg was seen too late. It was too late to carry out any emergency maneuvers. The iceberg would have been seen only 30 seconds before impact and would have allowed nothing to be done. The two ships that were considered unsinkable at the time had exactly the same very advanced waterproofing system, but despite that, as we have seen, the two boats will meet a tragic fate. Finally, during one, it will be more than 1,000 imaginary people who will be shipwrecked and disappear. The Titanic actually killed 1,500 people. Only the novel The Titan survivors were rescued by a ship bound for Gibraltar, and for the Titanic were also rescued by a ship bound for Gibraltar. Yet despite much research that has been done to determine how this novel could have predicted the tragic fate of the Titanic 14 years before, unfortunately, there is no rational and definitive explanation to this mystery. And to fuel the mystery, a legend claims that he wrote this novel with an astral partner. And even if no one ever really understood what it meant, we can't take away that this author showed incredible clairvoyance in writing this novel. And that's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to tell me in the comments, and if you have other topics like that you want me to cover in my next videos. If you are interested in myths and legends, you can go see all my other episodes. You can like, share and subscribe, but we'll see you in a future video. This is Techie on Fire. Peace out.